Hey guys, Mike here, and in this video we're going to pitch the Apple iPad Air against its predecessor, the iPad 4. First things first, the iPad is more compact, slimmer and lighter than the iPad 4, and you'll notice that from the moment you'll get your hands on it. You'll also notice and appreciate the redesigned body. The sharp and long edges of the iPad 4 were replaced with shorter, rounded ones. In fact, the Air resembles last year's iPad mini in terms of design lines. Regardless, there's no argue that this new tablet is much more comfortable to hold and use than last year's model, both due to these aesthetic changes, but also because the new iPad has lost about 180 grams. On the front, you might have noticed the narrow bezel and the fact that your thumb might actually lie on the display when grabbing the slate, but that's not a problem, the software is smart enough to ignore it. I have the space gray version of the iPad Air here, which succeeds the black version of the iPad 4, also present in this comparison. Both have a black bezel, but the back is slightly darker on the Air and the plastic logo hiding the Wi-Fi antennas is no longer black. There's also a silver version of the Air with a white bezel, meant to succeed last year's white iPad 4. The subtle aesthetic differences don't stop here though. The buttons are now made from actual metal and match the overall color of the Air, while on the iPad Air we had the same black plastic buttons on both color options. And while the buttons placement has not changed, you'll notice that there are two individual buttons used for the volume rocker. And there are a few other minor changes. On the back there's now a secondary microphone, and on the bottom we have a set of stereo speakers flanking the Lightning port as opposed to the single speaker on the older iPad. But how about the screens? Well, not much has changed from the 4th to the 5th generation iPad. Both slates feature 9.7-inch Retina displays and IPS panels. There are some very slight differences in terms of brightness, contrast, viewing angles and colors, but it's difficult to distinguish those even when having the two tablets side by side. So long story short, for the regular user, the screen on the iPad 4 is just as good as the one on the iPad Air. However, the glass surface on top of the display seems more fragile on the Air, as it slightly flexes when tapping the screen. When it comes to the hardware inside these devices, things are a bit different. The Air bundles a new Apple A7 processor, the first 64-bit CPU mounted on a tablet, helped by an M7 Motion co-processor. It also packs just 1GB of RAM, just like its predecessor. In benchmarks, the Air clearly outscores the 4. But in everyday use though, it does not feel significantly faster, unless you're performing more complex tasks on your device like editing videos and photos. And I bet most of you won't and will just stick to browsing, gaming, multimedia and other casual activities. In which case, the Air is only marginally snappier than its predecessor, but the gap should widen as more apps optimized for the 64-bit architecture will be available. Software-wise, you're getting the same iOS 7 on both these slates with its pros and cons. We're not going to get in depth about that here. You're also getting access to Apple's vast ecosystem of applications, which is perhaps an iPad's greatest asset these days. However, on the Air there's also a small selection of free software bundled that includes iMovie and the iWork suite of productivity apps, useful if you're planning on working with documents on your device. Bottom point, if you have an iPad 4, there's nothing you can do with the iPad Air and cannot with your unit. However, the Air does run somewhat cooler than the 4 and at the same time lasts slightly longer on a charge. And that despite having a smaller battery. There's a 32Wh battery inside the Air and a 43Wh one on the iPad 4, but the hardware on the newer tablet is more efficient. And since the battery is smaller, the Air will need about 1 hour less than its predecessor to fully charge. Alright, all these things mentioned above are the main differences between these slates, but there are a few other subtle changes and improvements offered by the Air. For instance, it does pack a brighter and somewhat sharper front-facing camera than the one on the 4, despite the fact that on paper the two are the same. In FaceTime though, I for one could see the differences. It also offers two microphones, which helps with isolating exterior noise if you're planning on having a video call in a noisier room. As for the main cameras, they're actually identical with a 5-megapixel sensor and no flash. As a result, the pics and videos coming out of the two are alright, just don't expect too much from them. Then you do get stereo speakers on the iPad Air placed on the bottom edge, like with the iPad mini. They are loud and punchy, not that easy to muffle with your hand, but I can't say they're better than the iPad's 4 single speaker. Moving on, there's also some minor connectivity tweaks offered by the Air. For instance, a MIMO array of wireless antennas which promises faster Wi-Fi speeds and unified support for LTE frequencies. With the iPad 4, you had to choose between two different versions based on the 4G bands used in your area. In the end, the iPad Air is clearly the best 9.7-inch iPad I've seen so far. It's better than the iPad 4 in many ways. However, you should know that the iPad 4 has been discontinued and replaced by the Air, with prices starting at $499. So when looking at these two slates, we should not ask ourselves which one is the better pick, because the Air is the only one you will find in stores in the near future. However, you might want to know whether it's worth upgrading to the Air from the Apple iPad 4. And in my opinion, keeping faithful to Apple's policies, the Air is an incremental update from its predecessor. That's why if money are not a problem, then yes, go get the Air. For a more price-conscious buyer though, unless you really want a more compact and lighter device, there are no other obvious reasons why you should ditch the iPad 4 for a brand new Air. Yes, the new hardware platform and all the other minor tweaks are welcomed, but there's nothing major, nothing that you cannot live without right now on this new Apple iPad Air. At least that's how I see things. But I'd love to know what you guys think about these two tablets, so make sure to leave your comments in the section down below. And if you're planning on buying an iPad Air, I'd like to know what's the one aspect that you like most about this new tablet. Alright, all this being said, it's time to end this video here. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the clip, hit that thumbs up button, share it around and subscribe for my next updates on the iPad Air and many other tablets. I hope to see you again soon.